Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to CSW69, share back session hosted by OCIC delegates. My name is Selena and I'm here today with my colleague Tashin. The purpose of this session is for our delegates to share their reflections and learning from attending the 69th session of the Commission of the Status of Women held in March 2025. Before we start, I would like to begin by saying OCIC recognizes and honors the Indigenous peoples who have historically and do presently live and work on the traditional both treaty and unceded territories that we operate on. These include the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation, and many others. We acknowledge that our staff, board, volunteers, members, and broader community operate on the treaty and unceded territories of these and numerous other Indigenous peoples and nations. As we reflect on our role within a settler colonial context, we acknowledge the importance of naming the Indigenous peoples and nations on whose lands we live in, work, and play, and understand the importance of framing our engagement in the international cooperation sector and beyond through the lens of reconciliation and decolonization. We recognize that we have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples who have and continue to fight for social justice on their own lands. I would like to now hand it over to Tashin to speak about some housekeeping rules as well as provide a short introduction to CSW.
Hi, everyone. As per the housekeeping expectations, please check your Zoom name and add in your full name and organization if applicable. Interpretation and closed caption is available through Wordly and can be accessed through by clicking on the Allow button on the Wordly notification that popped up on the top right of your screen, or by following the instructions pasted on the chat box. And please feel free to just see some of those instructions shared there. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the session, so please feel free to ask questions in the chat box or raise your hand if you would like to speak. Please keep your sound muted unless you have raised your hand and have been invited to speak. OCIC is committed to creating a safe and inclusive space. We ask all participants to commit to our code of conduct shared via chat just now. And just to go beyond the introductions and the housekeeping, some of you may be wondering, what is CSW? And if you didn't know, the 69th Annual Commission of the Status of Women, CSW69, the UN's largest annual gathering on gender equality and women's empowerment, took place this year from March 10th to the 21st, under the priority theme of the review and appraisal of the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. At CSW, representatives of the UN member states, civil society and organizations, and the UN entities gather at UN headquarters in New York to discuss progress and gaps in the implementation of the 1995 Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. To give you a sense of the scale of the event, well, this year, the session featured approximately 230 official side events and over 700 civil society and NGO parallel events. These events were accessible both in person and online, and in total, over 13,000 participants entered the UN building during the 11-day session, with many more joining virtually from around the world. Of those participants, 5,485 were civil society members, and this is the largest ever. And with that, I'll hand it over to Selena to introduce our delegates.
So we have some amazing people with us today. So Dorothy Baziwe is our first delegate. So she is the Executive Director of Shelter and Settlements Alternative in Uganda and a social worker by profession in the human settlement sector in Uganda since 2012. In the sector, Dorothy has engaged in various activities, including fundraising for housing projects, demonstrating housing development, advocacy and lobbying for responsive policies and programs, networking, collaboration with both state and non-state actors, as well as research and information sharing, all aimed at improved service delivery to vulnerable households in Uganda. In her work in the human settlement sector, some of the achievements include, among others, influencing policies, programs, and practices to ensure responsiveness to the needs of the vulnerable communities, developing housing microfinance projects or products to support increased access to land and housing, implementing gender-specific projects and programs that highlight and promote environmental justice and climate change actions in Uganda. We also have Meseret Haileyesus. She is a multi-award-winning social entrepreneur and economic justice advocate with over 20 years of leadership in financial inclusion, gender equity, and policy reform. As a CEO of the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, she works with government and financial institutions to advance safe digital payments and protect women from economic and tech-facilitated abuse. She is a national leader in economic harm reform. Meseret has testified before Parliament and has driven global policy discussions on financial empowerment, sustainability, and economic security at platforms including the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. And she's also a vocal advocate for connecting financial inclusion with climate resilience. Her work has been featured in Forbes, CBC, and Globe and Mail, and she has been recognized with top honors, including Canada's Top 25 Women of Influence 2024 and Google's Women Entrepreneur Award. We also have Marilou McPhedran. She is a human rights lawyer, educator, activist, and Order of Canada member, appointed an independent senator on the recommendation of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in November 2016, and was recognized for her co-leadership in developing constitutional equality rights. She sponsors Bill S-201 to lower the federal voting age to 16, as well as Bill S-261, the Can't Buy Silence Act, to stop misuse of non-disclosure agreements by entities receiving federal funding. A top priority on our Senate agenda is engaging and facilitating contributions by diverse young leaders in Canadian parliamentary affairs and global multilateralism. We also have Mia Vallière. She is a recent graduate from Laurentian University with a bachelor's in criminology, as well as a passionate advocate for human rights. She has worked in local social services with the Northern Initiative for Social Action and internationally with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind as part of their international youth internship program. Mia has also engaged with our community by organizing a protest to raise awareness for the lack of accessible reproductive health care in Indigenous and rural communities in Northern Ontario. As she pursues further education in disciplinary studies, Mia continues to be an active participant in advocacy near and far from home with the Ontario Council for International Cooperation and budding local initiatives. Mia hopes to pursue a career in law and policy with the goal of making long-term positive impacts for humankind. Being at the United Nations has been a dream of hers since Mia was a young girl, and seeing it come to fruition has reinforced her passions and strengthened her hope for the brighter future she intends to help build. We also have Margaret Zhu. She is a nonprofit leader with over 8 years of experience in project management, organizational development, and climate and social justice advocacy. She currently serves as executive director of the Kawartha World Issue Center, where she leads initiatives advancing gender equality and amplifying youth voices in climate action in her local community. Her career in the nonprofit sector is grounded in the intersection of gender, climate, and health, and includes leadership roles at organizations such as the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, SDG Cities, and Global Health Mentorships. She has led multi-stakeholder programs, coordinated educational initiatives, and implemented strategic advocacy campaigns. Her work includes delivering climate and global justice programming to diverse audiences, building cross-sector partnerships, and managing teams to deliver mentorship and educational programs for youth and young professionals worldwide. And our last delegate is Kezia Oduro. She is a storyteller and systems thinker working at the intersection of social finance, grassroots advocacy, and public policy. She bridges movements and institutions to reimagine how resources flow to 2S LGBTQ+, Black, and youth communities historically excluded from economic decision-making. As a learning coordinator at SDGs, Kezia supports the development of feminist, community-led finance models across Canada. She also leads fund development efforts with Ottawa-based organizations and develops grant-making models with Laidlaw Foundation's Black Youth Fund and Defense for Children International. She's also a board member at LGBT Youth Line and an ambassador with the Children's Aid Foundation of Canada. She brings lived experience and policy insight to youth-led systems change in these spaces and is studying political science and social impact at the University of Ottawa.
Thank you so much, Selena and Tashin, for that amazing overview. My name is Kezia. I am actually the moderator for today. I'm reliving my glory days, as last year I was a delegate to CSW68 with OCIC. And it was an amazing, amazing opportunity to get to meet some of the people on the panel today, as well as get to connect with amazing organizations across the world on the work that they were doing. So I'm currently based on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples, also known as Ottawa, Ontario. And like I mentioned, I was a CSW 68 delegate last year. I was a member of the Youth Policy Hub Makers. So this exact session that we're here today, I was last year's cohort. And we have some amazing people as well who are also part of it. Rachel Morrison, who supported and also co-created an amazing adolescence recommendations to UN Women. So our theme last year was accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening financing institutions. And so as you heard from my background, I work in the space of community social finance and helping communities move money into social equity lenses. And so supported Messi in some work that they have done with the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, as well as ICNOR, the work that she's doing with YPH and has worked with Senator McPhedran, as well as the work that YPH is doing right now. It's really cool to see so many different spaces all coming together to talk about this work. I'm gonna jump right into our talk for today. As you heard from our amazing breakdown, we have Messi from Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. We have Margaret from Kawartha. We have Mia Vallière from YPH and Senator Marilou McPhedran. Our very first question is, can you share your experience working in the gender equality space and how it aligns with or contributes to the goals of Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action? We also have Dorothy as well on the line. Dorothy is working in the shelter and settlements alternative. And so I'm actually going to pass it to Dorothy first to talk a bit about your experience working in gender equality spaces and how it aligns with or contributes to the goals of the Beijing Declaration.
Thank you, Kezia. Hello, everyone. My name is Dorothy Baziwe, and I work with Shelter and Settlements Alternative in Uganda, but I also convene the Women and Habitat Africa Working Group under Habitat International Coalition. So working in the human settlement sector in Uganda, we come across experiences as the patriarchal society. We come across experiences where women have been left behind. Women have not been allowed to the table, have not been allowed to participate in productive ventures. So it really brings out the gender equality gap in our country, and it motivates us as people who are working under the rights-based approach to land, housing, and other productive resources to participate in initiatives that ensure that there is gender equality. And the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action is very clear. It's a foundational framework for gender equality. And this has been localized in our country, has been localized in our policies, has been localized in some practices. But for the case of Uganda, we find that a big gap has been created between the actual policy declarations and the policy statements and the actual implementation on ground. So we find that for us as an organization, as SSA, the working in the gender equality space highlights women's rights to land, housing, and other productive resources. We use this as a rights awareness campaign. We use it as a sensitization campaign to help the communities that we work with understand what are their rights, their obligations, but also their entitlements to land, housing, and other productive resources. it also brings out the issue of women's voice and representation. For a long time, coming from a patriarchal society, we find that women have been left behind, have been seen but not heard, if I could put it that way. But we find that SSA is fighting this by educating women and building their capacities and teaching them that they have a voice. They can voice their demands, they can be able to articulate their desires and be able to actually gain a seat at the table, be able to take positions of leadership, be able to be elected to positions that are either political or take up technical positions where they can influence development and be able to bring the plight of women further and start to cause change for gender equality. Another thing I wanted to talk about is, as SSA, we are also promoting the end of all forms of violence against women and girls. We do this through our paralegal services, where we have community women who are going around teaching, sensitizing other women to understand the policies, the laws, and the legal frameworks of the country, and they're able to support women who are facing instances of gender-based violence and supporting them to be able to articulate and to get redress from different platforms. Lastly, women's rights to livelihood has been really downplayed in our communities, and it is an opportunity for us to work with women to gain a meaningful livelihood, because women are the caregivers and women are the heads of households, and they are the ones who are running the show in instances in communities where we work. So we find that the Beijing Declaration clearly helps us to highlight what women need to be, how they need to be capacitated to be able to speak, to be able to own their process, and to be able to be a part of the development they want to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. You reminded me of something that really was shown when I attended last year. Like, CSW68, Beijing Declaration, it's all a platform to move on the work that's already being done and to create spaces where we can start talking about the intersections of the work that we do. And I feel like SSA has done a great job of grounding their work in what they're doing in Uganda, but also trying to, use the platform for action to move their work forward. I remember last year, Messi, I'm going to segue to you to answer this question. At CSW68, you announced the Economic Abuse Awareness Day, as well as your work in that space. And so I'd love to pass to you. Can you share your experience working in the gender equality space and how it aligns with or contributes to the goals of Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action?
Okay, thank you so much. Nice to see you, Kasia. I know we were together, I think, last year at the CSW, and thank you so much for inviting me for this very important call. At the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment, just to give you an idea, we're the only agency so far in Canada addressing economic abuse, so system change, policy innovation, economic empowerment, and advocacy. So our work, it's in line with the Beijing Declaration by tackling, the intersectional voice against the women, women inequalities and systemic barriers. Economic abuse, unfortunately, it's the most hidden and under-recorded and under-reported form of violence, but 96% of victims experience every day. So we empower survivors, especially migrant, refugee, racialized, victims through our research work, advocacy, and of course, survivor-led program as a survivor as well. And one of our work is mostly in line with is on system change, which is banks, financial institution, government, and some of the legal system that build the institutional response that are also not trauma-informed, which was not designed for victims in this country. So we're trying to remove the structural barriers through advocacy and then system change work. So our first 100% align with the Beijing platform and the Sustainable Development Goal. When you see economic abuse, it touch all, most, I would say like 5, 6 goal indirectly, which is still like, in line with this platform. And this platform, of course, it helps us for making the invisible form of abuse to be visible, ensuring also women to have the right economy, the right financial right, and also to make sure also financial institutions to be accountable so that they can create safe and equitable product and service for a victim. So for us, economic safety is all about, it's not an option, it's essential for true equality. And we believe also economic abuse is not only financial matters, it's also human right and dignity. So our work is aligned with all UN Sustainable Development Goal and Beijing Declaration. In addition to that, we are also able to support women directly, as I mentioned. So that's also in line to make sure that women to have safe economy. We believe women deserve safe economic rights, with regardless she's abused or not. So our work is specifically that address. And in addition to that, of course, our Globally First, I'm going to actually talk about it. We have a November 26th, as you know, it was announced last year at the UN. I was very happy, which is a day close to my heart, where the day I live abuse. That's the reason I asked the government to have a national day. So that collaborations and that announcements also helps us to amplify our voice, not only at the United Nations. This year also I was at the World Bank and IMF meeting. So that's also another thing what we are doing to support this declaration in one or another way. Thank you.
Thank you, Messi. Amazing, amazing to hear. Speaking of announcements, I remember last year when Ahmed Hussein released the International Youth internship program, and that was an amazing program. I remember my friends sending it to me, telling me about all the different regions, and we have a YPH member, Mia Vallière, who has been a part of it. Mia, I would love to push this question to you. Can you share your experience working in the gender equality space and how it aligns with or contributes to the goals of Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action?
Yeah, absolutely. My work in the gender equality space has been very diverse, with different organizations, like you said, with the internship and OCIC, and at times it's been self-led as well. So a strong area of focus for me in my research and activism has been sexual and reproductive rights. So the section on women and health in the Beijing Declaration talks about various aspects of things like reproductive justice. It says that we need to protect and enhance access to sexual and reproductive health care. And that was a primary focus of the protest that I co-organized in my community to raise awareness of anti-choice rhetoric in politics and the lack of access to reproductive health care services for people living in rural and remote communities, and especially for Indigenous peoples in Canada. But I've also had a great deal of my research focus on sexual and reproductive rights as well in the context of armed conflict. This past March, for International Women's Day, I had my first article published with Population and Security discussing the weaponization of female bodies via the transmission of HIV, which in some countries that are destabilized by armed conflict then has an increased risk of progressing to AIDS. That article ends by referencing Resolution 1325, which recalled the commitments of the Beijing Declaration while making its own calls to action for states. I'd also say that in my research and work, I have primarily worked on raising awareness and encouraging calls to action, particularly for youth who are becoming more and more disengaged every single day. For example, I'm working on a chapter focused on critiquing the heteropatriarchal colonial logic in Thomas Hobbes's philosophy. So in that chapter, I try to take theory that feels so big and daunting and apply it to the reality as we see it in today's colonial modernity for women and members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, to demonstrate the ways in which colonialism continues to harm progress towards gender equality, with the hopes that youth will be able to connect with the work through recognizing hardship that's highlighted in the chapter that they could see day to day, understanding its origins, and identifying these dominant ideas and narratives which they need to challenge to make change for reconciliation and for gender equality. And with OCIC, I'm working with the YPH cohort, and I'm very, very happy to get to put all this work together with them that focuses on the Beijing Declaration as our shared youth engagement project. So it's a zine, and the zine is focused on raising awareness and showing young people that they can and should play a role in pushing for progress that is described in the Beijing Declaration. So for my section, I wrote about violence against women. And in my piece, I issued a call to action that absolutely anyone can undertake. I talked about the importance of changing the way we think about women and men, about changing the narrative of inferiority versus superiority, which are words that are used in the Beijing Declaration, about challenging stereotypes that harm us all, about the importance of having everyone in the discussions that lead to change. So the Beijing Declaration still hasn't been implemented completely. We've come very far, but we can't slow down. And that is probably my biggest focus throughout all the different kinds of projects I take on.
Oh, thank you so much. That was an amazing overview. It's really cool to hear more what happens on the ground. I know for myself, I always say like we wear different hats, we engage ourselves in different types of spaces. So it's really cool to hear all the work that you're doing. And speaking of youth engagement, I know that Senator McPhedran has a huge mandate in this space. One of my former YPH members I was on cohort with was a part of the Canadian Council of Young Feminists that Senator McPhedran runs. So I would love to pass the floor to her. I know there's way more that she's got on her agenda. So I'll definitely pass to you to answer the question on Beijing Declaration and the platform for action.
Kezia, it's great to see you and Macy and others who we've connected at CSW in New York and also other events in other places. Thank you for this invitation. I really appreciate it. When I got the call to agree to be appointed to the Senate, the Prime Minister at the time asked me what my priority would be, and I told him it was to try to find ways to bring the Senate to youth and youth to the Senate. And the Commission on the Status of Women annual, the largest women's rights conference on an annual basis in the world, year after year around International Women's Day, has been a focus for me, both as an educator and now as a senator, for trying in a variety of ways to increase the engagement and the contributions of young leaders, young Canadian leaders. And so I think both Macy and Kezia, you were at the orientation that I co-host every year. I have been of the opinion, I've been doing it now for almost 20 years at the beginning of CSW for Canadian delegates. And it's been my opinion for almost those 20 years that this is something the Canadian government should be doing, but they don't. So we take the initiative because that one orientation session right at the beginning of CSW is often the first time that many Canadian delegates are meeting each other. And they don't even know in advance that they're going to be in New York at CSW. And so this is a way of trying to support the messaging and the coordination of efforts, not only during CSW, that's obviously very important, but long after, because relationships get built, recognition in the hallway or sitting in a meeting room, and being able to strengthen those linkages. One of my biggest concerns about the CSW process, and hopefully there is a report coming on making some changes to the process, but it's been pretty much the same in the 20 years I've been attending, is this disconnect between what the governments are doing. Now, increasingly, civil society delegates never step foot over across the street into the actual UN headquarters because the security requirements have become so much stricter now that it can be very, very difficult. And the Canadian reception for civil society delegates only allows 2 delegates out of 20 out of each delegation coming. So that too has an exclusionary aspect to it. So on that theme of inclusion, this is something that I'm hoping that one of the takeaways about what are we seeing as a result of 30 years since the Beijing Platform for Action is, where are the tangible improvements for civil society opportunities, both in New York at CSW every March and before and afterwards? And now that we have a wage department reinstated in the new Carney government, may I encourage everyone on this call to pay attention to this. The fact that on March 14th, the Prime Minister, on the very first day of being Prime Minister Carney eliminated a minister for wage, and it was not mentioned by one single major media outlet. It came down to women civil society leaders generating the interest, creating the letter of 400 signatures signed by myself and some other parliamentarians as well. And it's that kind of mobilization at the civil society level. Trust me, I'm an old feminist warhorse, and I have seen this over and over again. It's the civil society motivation that makes these changes. So kudos to every single one of you on this call today. My main message that I wanted to make in the relatively short time that we have is to also encourage you to think about not only the Beijing Platform for Action, because that is a high-level policy of the United Nations. It's been in operation for 30 years. It is not a legal obligation. The intersection between the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, that's where you have legal obligations in terms of women's equality. And you also have some interpretations which are very important that come from what's called the CEDAW Monitoring Committee. We have delegations that our Indigenous women leaders have been particularly skilled at using the CEDAW monitoring process as a way of both raising awareness, but also really promoting and pushing our government to respond in a more substantive way than has often been the case prior to these monitoring sessions with the CEDAW committee. And for those of you not familiar with that process within the UN system, every human rights treaty has a separate monitoring body that is composed of experts from different countries who are elected to hold that position. So for example, at the current time, we only have one Canadian expert on one of the treaty monitoring bodies, and that is for the Convention for Persons Living with Disabilities. And so looking at the way in which the legal obligations under CEDAW intersect with the high-level policy commitments under the Beijing Platform for Action is a way, I think, of strengthening the kind of advocacy that all of you are engaged in. And I refer you to the first, and I'm sorry to say, I think the only CEDAW impact study, which is in the chat, which is a research project that I led 25 years ago. But it looks at the way in which the Beijing Platform for Action and CEDAW were both useful. I guess there's one main conclusion that came out of that impact study, which is they need each other, they help each other. Advocates can use them in a very complementary way. The last point I want to make is about the current state of affairs. And what was one of the clearest messages that came from many countries, representatives from many countries at CSW69 just this past March, was the way in which we basically know already we are going to see, it could be in the millions, it will definitely be in the thousands of deaths of women and girls as a result of the cuts that have taken place primarily through the Secretary of State, and the USAID program. And in many countries, it's more than 50%. In some countries, it's as high as 80% of the aid programs that are geared to women and girls were actually in American dollars. And so this is something that not only do we have very significant challenges within Canada, but we also have massive implications for our sisters in many, many countries now. And we've seen this shift in many countries to less democratic processes and governments. Generally speaking, you see a high correlation between a right-wing agenda, which targets women. Very often it's targeting of women and women's organizations is top on the agenda. And so that's not an upbeat note for me to leave you with, but it is something that occupies my concern every single day. And the ways in which we within Canada can find ways to support our sisters in other countries, the ways in which we can advocate within Canada to the Canadian government to do even more than we're doing to help our world and to help women and girls in our world get through this time of regression.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Senator. You made a point there about the Canadian government supporting initiatives around knowledge mobilization, especially to youth spaces. And we have Margaret on the line, who is a panelist with us today and is the Executive Director of Kawartha World Issues and is leading that charge in Southern Ontario and across Ontario. And so, Margaret, I wanted to pose to you, can you share your experience working in the gender equality space? But just on the basis of time, I also wanted to kind of segue into your key reflections on the implementation of the Platform for Action, as well as your experience at CSW69. So if you're able to kind of mold those two questions together, you have the floor for about 5 minutes or so. 3 minutes or so, and then from there I'll go on to the other executive directors, Dorothy and Messi, as well as Senator McPhedran, on your experiences at CSW69. But to you, Margaret, first.
Thank you so much, Kezia. So my name is Margaret, and I work at Kawartha World Issue Center, or QWIC, and we are a small grassroots charity based out of Peterborough, and we connect youth, local youth to global issues in the community. We also work with the community at large through our educational programs and initiatives, and we've been doing this work for the past 35 years. And QWIC's work in the gender equality space has been deeply aligned with the goals of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And I just want to highlight some of our recent projects, which is super exciting in my opinion. And so in 2021, we launched the Advancing Gender Equality Project. And this project focused on increasing awareness and dialogue on gender equality and the Beijing platform by engaging local and regional partners through community conversations, workshops, and storytelling. And in these workshops and conversations, we really wanted to create inclusive spaces, particularly for youth, women, and Indigenous and racialized voices, to explore barriers and solutions to gender equality in the local setting. And building on the first project, we had another project called Amplifying Gender Equality Project, which is still going on today. And it focused on amplifying youth voices and leadership around gender equality through media, art, and the use of community engagement. And we started this project last summer with tabling at different spaces where folks gather in the community to raise awareness of gender equality. So we hosted tables at the mall, cafes, and universities within Peterborough. And students would go out and table and have pamphlets and have conversations with folks in the community where they could talk about gender equality. And in the fall, we hosted 4 workshops around gender equality, and they're very informal workshops. And because we realized gender equality is not something that people are always very comfortable talking about. So we wanted to host it in an informal setting. So we hosted dinners and walks in the park and board games and also an art workshop. And just to create conversation about gender equality. So we'd have prompts during these workshops and usually it's a really good time. So overall, around we managed to engage around 500 folks within the community, also with youth as well. And it seems that folks really enjoy these workshops, and there was a lot of talk on action, bringing action forward and moving gender equality in the community. I also want to highlight that we also host our annual International Women's Day event, usually in March. So we just hosted it about 2 months ago, and the topic was accelerating action in Nogojuwanon or Peterborough. And we usually align the event with the UN Women's theme, and this year was accelerating progress. But we also want to ground that very much in our local realities. So we hosted panels, performances, and community action around ending violence against women and girls, climate justice, and intergenerational solidarity. And across all our work, we always aim to center marginalized voices and foster that intersectional approach, and also bridging that global framework with local action. And as a grassroots organization, we're really small, but we want to lead change from the ground up and contribute to that overall long-term systemic change. And I'm just going to segue really quickly into the reflection question.
Yes,
And
thank you so much. I'm like,
I'll do
I'm
my
watching
best.
time. Yeah, I'm watching time, and I also want to get
Yeah, me
everyone's
too.
points in. So I'll do,
Yeah.
Margaret, if you can, what were your key reflections, and then
Okay.
I'll pass it back to somebody after you're finished. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I think I just, noticed, I think this is also something that the other panelists reflected on. I noticed that there is somewhat of a gap between the international, what's happening at the international level and local level, right? So the BPfA sets a really important framework, but on the ground, especially in smaller communities like ours, we're still seeing some pretty big gaps. Indigenous women, newcomers, and youth continue to face real systemic barriers to accessing leadership opportunities, safety, education, etc. And I really want to emphasize that international frameworks means very little unless they're translated into local action. On the other hand, I want to say that I'm really excited to see so many sessions during CSW focused on youth. And that leadership is really going strong. And I was really energized to see young people taking up space and pushing for change, especially leading the way for things like digital health and sexual reproductive health. So yeah, really happy to see that. It was fantastic.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Honestly, CSW69, this was a very monumental year. So it's really cool to see that some of the, issues that, we've talked about for a couple of years are now being platformed as what it needs to be fixed before, sustainability is put in place. So very, very interesting to hear. I'm going to pass it to Mia to talk a little bit about what your key reflections were in implementing, in your experience at CSW69.
Sure. I learned so much while I was at CSW that I don't think I could possibly fit it all into one call, maybe not even 2 or 3, but I'll try to focus on 2 really big ones for me. Firstly, while I was at a side event with the Nordic panel of ministers, I learned about the incredible progress made in countries like Iceland, Sweden, and Denmark to progress gender equality. To me, it sounded like I was sitting there thinking, wow, they really have it all figured out. But what stood out to me is the way that the ministers talked about it. They didn't think about it that way. They didn't see their work as complete. That's why they called the event pushing for progress, push for progress. They wanted to make it clear that what they've accomplished is only a start, and that strides towards gender equality need to be actively protected while pushing for more. Gender equality is a human right, but that doesn't mean it becomes guaranteed as we get closer to it. It's something we can and will lose if we do not actively protect it in our social and political spheres. That's why we're seeing regression worldwide. That's why we're seeing democratic backsliding, which was a really strong focus at CSW. But like Senator McPhedran was saying, governments don't always push for progress and protect that progress on their own volition. I often share what a professor once told me, that change didn't happen because people in power gathered in a boardroom and decided to do better. It happened because we, the people, demanded that they do better. Those words were really echoing in mind while I was at CSW. And now I see how many people around the world in politics and advocacy and beyond share that point of view. Now I find myself reflecting on how we get people to push. While political apathy and democratic backsliding are increasing together, which events at CSW were also emphasizing. It's something that's on my mind every day. Like, how do we mobilize people to push for progress, especially when it gets hard? And I hope that everyone on this call right now, from this moment forward, finds themselves thinking of this just as often or more. It's going to take all of our ideas, all of our participation. We have to share it with others and have those uncomfortable conversations when you're out with your friends and your family. We have to get people thinking. I know that when after CSW, I was out with my friends, and one person was talking about how their business program had showed them that women's leadership in business is almost at parity in Canada, and that the pay gap is no more. But I immediately jumped in, not just to correct, but to engage with them. I talked about how there's an added expectation of domestic labor for women in the household that impacts their professional livelihood. I talked about the instances of abuse and harassment in the workplace for women and how that impacts their mental and physical health. I asked them to name the most successful people in business they could, and they couldn't name one woman after 10 minutes. A few weeks later, I received a text from that friend, and they ran into someone whilst out on their own, and they had thought similarly to them, but now that friend was engaging with them, and they messaged me to say how proud they were that they felt they could change someone's mind. And this is how we start. We get people thinking, we change mindsets, and then we get to action. And that brings me to the second key takeaway, something that was shared in the very last event that I attended. And it was one that was focused on how we combat gender apartheid in Afghanistan. Something that one of the ministers said really sticks with me, and I find myself thinking about it all the time. She said that women in Afghanistan no longer need our awareness, that they have the world's attention and awareness isn't enough. They need our action. I was moved by the fact that this event was aiming to amplify the voices of women from Afghanistan, even those who were living in exile, to give them this opportunity to demonstrate that they are strong, they are capable of speaking out, they are capable of action, and they just need our support. I was even shocked, but very proud to see so many ministers from around the world supporting that the international community no longer recognized the Taliban as a formal government. Since then, I've engaged in discussions on this topic as well with friends, with colleagues, those I'm meeting for the first time, whether in activist circles or casual social ones. And I think I've come to a point where I agree that awareness is just the start. It's not enough on its own, and I continue to reflect on what action we should be taking and how we get people there as a global community, as a Canadian community, as a youth community, as activists. It's forced me to rethink how I should approach policy advocacy and how I might, as a hopeful future political representative, do more than ask for attention on issues, but instead reflect on how I can break away from the status quo that isn't working and instead push for and protect progress.
Oh, I have to give that a moment. Yeah, thank you. I remember after CSW68, I was so energized, and like, I feel like you are taking it and you're ready to bring that back to the community and to snowball with it. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to skip a couple questions. We'll come back to our main one. To speak to Senator McPhedran, you actually had, I feel like I'm watching like into a portal and seeing like mini versions of some of our mentors on the line. And Senator McPhedran, we had a question for you. I know you have to hop off in a moment. Based on what you're hearing from Mia and Messi and Dorothy and Margaret around what's going on in the landscape and what you've talked about in the policy space around gender equality, do you have a call to action for us and for, oh, yeah, I see you smiling. I guess you already do. A call to action on what's going on in the space, how to mobilize our youth communities, how to mobilize our nonprofits. I remember last year we were ready, we had so much momentum, but then things died down, and then boom, CSW70 is on our radar again. So please, I'm going to give the floor to you. I know you have to leave in a few, but after that, I'll take it back to Dorothy and Messi and Margaret to answer the above question.
Kezia, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who's spoken. I'm just, yes, I'm smiling. I'm actually beaming because these are the kinds of discussions that just reinforce for me over and over again that 20 plus years of trying to find ways to increase civil society participation, especially of young leaders, is the way to go. I mean, I feel your energy. I feel fresh thinking. I hear fresh approaches. There's a disconnect, though, that I want to share, and I want to encourage you to make the connection. I'm not apologizing for how distant your parliamentarians can often seem to you, to those of you, especially who work at the community level. I know this is a problem. It's part of the challenge that we face in building a more inclusive, more vital democracy. But I do encourage you to the kinds of conversations that you've described within your communities. Even if you don't necessarily agree with your member of parliament, please try to include them, and also don't forget their staff. I think there's not always an appreciation of how much staff give to a parliamentarian, especially staff at the constituency level. And so building that relationship can really potentially make a difference. And here's one specific example that I want to give. So finally, after weeks of advocacy, it does look like we were heard, and we have a minister for women and gender equality, and maybe youth, or maybe it got shunted off somewhere else. That's not entirely clear yet. My suggestion, my request, is that you include your local parliamentarians with a message about what was good about CSW, about the value of WAGE leading that process, about the need for more inclusive opportunities, and to convey, as you've done, many of you on this call, the very real benefits to you as advocates in specialized areas, as well as general advocacy for equality. And, you may want to remind them that it's constitutional in Canada. We have numerous sections of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but in particular, sections 15 and 28. And it's part of our Constitution. That's not the case for our civil society colleagues south of the border, but that is the case in Canada. And so combining that with our legal obligations under CEDAW and other human rights treaties in the UN system, the commitments to the Beijing Platform for Action, and 30 years later, as we've talked about, those 12 areas of action are all still relevant. They need to be updated, modernized, but they're all still relevant, as well as our constitutional commitment in this country to building an equality as a core of the lived rights. And I'll just close that by saying, in my teaching days, I would start most classes by reminding everyone, you can know your rights. That's a really important part of education. You can claim your rights. That's a really important part of defining who you are and what you do, and the relevance of your being part of a society. But to live your rights is different. Those are three different states of being. And what we're working toward together is a country and a democracy where people can live their rights. And it's the work that each of you and your organizations that you are doing now, and the way in which you strengthen your connections, this is what is going to get us through some really shitty days that we're going to have to live through in the future that's coming down the pike. So, merci, thank you, miigwech to all of you. Stay strong and stay connected.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. Glad you were able to join us for the time that you could. I see you have one question in the chat. Maybe we can ask to follow up later, but It was, shouldn't we promote the cancellation and reduction in development support and wake up call for most countries in the developing world to be frugal and inward looking far as financial resources are concerned? I think that we will definitely take this offline, and we can continue to take these questions to our Q&A session in about 20 to 30 minutes. But quick thank you to Senator McPhedran.
Thank you.
And we'll head back to regularly scheduled programming. So what were your key reflections on the implementation of Beijing Platform for Action? And I will take it to Dorothy to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in Uganda. I remember for myself, when you said announced it's nonsense. We had some organizations in Uganda talking about how different SRHR spaces and clinics are being shut down. At my work, we work in Colombia, and we had some projects that had to go on halt. So I definitely know the timing of all this right now in the international policy space has been very interesting. And so would love to hear about how CSW has really informed your work.
Thank you, Kezia. I think key reflections from the CSW. CSW69 was actually a first for me, but I think one of the key reflections I have is on the intersectionality of gender equality, how it cuts across different issues, whether it be economic empowerment, whether it be health, or as you have said, or whether it be land rights, or a very important issue like environment and climate change. The importance of underlining the gender equality in each and every one of those aspects, and ensuring that there is a platform for women to articulate themselves on these issues, and ensuring that they are part of the development process is very important. I think one of my key reflections of the CSW is the participation of grassroots communities, how they are able to engage and articulate and also influence, because for us it was not just a platform of networking and collaboration with the international world, but it was also an opportunity for us to engage with our stakeholders. As the Senator has said, it is an opportunity for us to also engage with parliamentarians, with leaders, with duty bearers of different walks of life. So it has been a very important platform for us, and we have been able to bring it back home into our communities, into our organizations first and foremost, having these sharing sessions within our organizations, either be it under the Women's Spaces Project, be it under the SSA members, be it under the communities where we have paralegals, where we have municipal development forums, talking about the Beijing Declaration and how it is relevant to us and how it has been localized into Ugandan government policies, and highlighting the challenge that we still have, which is the big gap between the policy statements and the implementation on ground, and making sure that we are able to empower our communities to understand these things, to also participate in processes, as have been mentioned here, the international processes, which we also have to localize and help our communities understand and declare themselves. So I think for me, the CSW was a very good platform for articulation, but also for getting our call to action before the duty bearers of all different levels. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Yeah, that local grassroots level, I think Mia even touched upon it too. Like, mobilization happens, in our communities, in our relational, from our staff to how we're getting our workshops, how we're communicating our work. So definitely that mobilization is a very important piece. You spoke a lot about how you're going to be sharing your learnings with your community. It's a very great segue into my next question. And so I will ask Messi and Margaret this question. So since attending CSW, how have you shared the experience and learnings with your organization and the communities you work with? I'll start with you, Messi.
So I know time is running.
Oh no,
So
you're okay
summarize.
for time. I'm gonna just to check for the audience. We have about 20 minutes, or sorry, 10 minutes more of a panel, and then at 2:25 we're going to be closing off. But then we have about 10 minutes after our panel for Q&A. So no worries, Messi. Please take the floor.
Yeah, so in terms of sharing, by the way, before I started my conversation, I would like to acknowledge the Beijing 30 and the Canadian Research Institute for Advancement for Women. They're the one who sponsored me this year, all my accommodation. I have to acknowledge, and then I would love to thank them. So in terms of sharing the experience, what I learned, as I mentioned earlier, we have a global platform. This platform is all about to amplify our voices to end economic abuse across the world. So we had a conversation with my global allies. So that's one of the most important things. And in addition to that, I attended also several sessions when I was attending the CSW this year on banking and zero financing, which was initiated by UNDP. So that conversation is also highlight for me, especially as advocate, to develop a framework how financial institution would be accountable. So I also share that experience and best practices for my global network. And in addition to that, we had also some takeaway from webinars and side events, stakeholder roundtable on advocacies on how migrant women be inclusive and in decision makings of economic right. So that's also another profounding moment for me. So I shared also some of the best practices for the agency who sponsored me to attend this event. And for me, CSW69, it was, as you know, it's very historical at the Beijing 30, but still I'm not fully happy because number one, economic abuse is not really recognized properly. And there was only one session even talk about economic abuse, which is our global ally, one of the agency, even it was side event. And I feel like most of the session talks about how financial equity is very critical to end gender-based violence, but no one is mentioning that clearly. And glad I know Senator, she left. I was also attended the UK Parliamentarian in Best Practices. And that best practice also, it's a profounding moment for us. I remember I asked the parliamentarian from UK, and last week also they share their financial code of conduct, and we share also for Canadian government here to adopt. I think that's also part of the CSW participation, and it also opened my eyes. And then the other thing, of course, I want to touch this as well. There is a huge digital divide. I feel like Beijing platform, if you see all the session, if you remember, it talks about women participation on technology, but sadly, technology facilitated abuse. I know there was a talk, but it was not as such. And of course, we'll continue advocating for that. And I feel intersectionality is not longer an optional. It should be an urgent. We have seen that migrant, refugees, and migrant women all over the world, they were also discriminated because of racial inequality. Still, that needs more reflection. And the huge part actually is gender financing. As you know, as a survivor, I lead this organization. I have a lot of challenge to access funding to sustain this work. For someone who looked like me, to heal, it takes time. To amplify, it takes time. To beg money and then to end gender-based violence, also another burden. So survivor-led funding framework must be part of that conversation. Of course, there were some platforms, they talk about it. So in our advocacy, in our organization, we always put funding has to be the most important thing to sustain this work. And of course, we'll continue the national financial inclusion policy. Canada is a little bit way behind. We're not like Australia and the UK. We'll continue to do that. And then another thing is I have seen also how global solidarity is a key, and we need to also localize sustainable development goal. I know Canada is a little bit behind on measuring even SDG, as you know, in our context. So I think those are the things what I learned. And hopefully in the future, we'll continue to do that. So our plan is we'll also continue work with UN Women and then making sure that even to put in their website the definition of economic abuse, still now it's the most rejected. And then it's not like given attention by the UN. So these are the things what we're trying to. Of course, I'm gonna write my policy debrief as a blog. Probably I can share for this network so that people they can learn what we are planning to do as well.
Thank you so much, Messi. I am now adding that to my list of things to read. There's so much there. I'd love to hear about the cross-sector support from the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women, as well as your work with the parliamentary units. That's very, very amazing. I remember just leaving and being like, how do I understand more about this space? How do I, put pen to paper, especially on like all different forms and levels? So very cool to hear how you are doing your share backs. I'm going to pass the floor to Margaret to speak a little bit about attending CSW68 and how you've brought these learnings back to your organization and your community.
Yeah, so since attending CSW, I've been intentional about bringing the experience and sort of the key learnings back to QUIC and also our broader community in terms of in ways that are somewhat relevant and action-oriented, I like to think. So we held sort of an internal reflection and team sharing at QUIC, where we debrief about the sessions with the staff and also our youth program participants to share some of the highlights and key themes and also personal reflections from CSW. We also explored some of the global discussions connecting to our current projects, especially the Amplifying Gender Equality project, which is very much going on, and then brainstorm ways to embed those into our insights, into our future programming, and also events like the upcoming International Women's Day in 2026. We also have ongoing projects and initiatives going on. So through our Amplifying Gender Equality project, we have shared insights from CSW with our youth participants and also the community to support them in responding in their own way through outreach and discussions. And it's important to us to frame CSW not just as a UN event, but as a larger kind of movement that we're all part of. And I think ultimately our goal has been to translate some of the global dialogue into local action and to kind of keep the momentum going and alive by incorporating it into our kind of ongoing work.
Losing my mute button. There we are. Thank you so much. To hear about all the work that's going on the ground in Peterborough and beyond, for myself, I'm like, Ottawa, we need to hurry up. We need to follow along. We need to, get our pen to paper. And so thank you so much for that. We've now reached our very last question. And this is actually going to Mia. Last year, I also saw Raja on the call. Raja, Fayez, Yusra, and Rachel and I did some work for UN Women in our youth and adolescent recommendations. And so we would love to hear, as well as other youth on the call, would love to hear what ways did CSW elevate and incorporate youth perspectives, and are there challenges to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best ways that youth perspectives were incorporated was through the parallel events that were hosted by NGOs and partnered organizations. So at CSW, for those of us who haven't been yet and hopefully will one day, there are the side events which are hosted by governments and their official delegations, and the parallel events that are hosted by NGOs and partnered organizations. So at these parallel events, youth were encouraged to share their stories, to share their views, and to ask questions of the panelists. And we had, smaller spaces, smaller rooms, more specialized and focused topics. So the youth there were really passionate, really interested, and they were able to engage very meaningfully. And they were so welcome to do so, and it felt like such a safe space that even I was up in every event that I could to speak and talk. So from my experiences at these events, these did lead to these in-depth discussions on policy or ideas. And for the latter, I really got to flex that academic muscle a little bit, which I really loved. And a lot of youth being in school do love to share what they've learned, what their perspectives are, how they're changing and evolving as they shift from the scholarly academic world into now the advocacy sphere, the UN. And I got to share my views on theory and ask questions about my areas of passion, and that was very, very special. Where I think we could improve is increasing the engagement side for those side events hosted by the governments and their delegations. There are the challenges of time constraints, how many delegates are permitted to certain events. I know presenters often said they wished everyone had a chance to talk, but there were times when only 2 or 3 people were able to interact with the panelists. And many of the youth at CSW, they were there for the first time. Many felt shy to put up their hands or unsure if they even could. Are there rules? Am I not allowed to? Are there people picked before? We weren't always sure. And that was a barrier to participating for a lot of youth. And we would kind of share that amongst ourselves while we were there. And this was particularly only when a couple of people were able to talk. For youth to have a better chance at interacting with government officials, experts, and advocates hosting these events, it would be great to see more of these events that are organized more specifically for youth. And I think that that big issue faced by youth at any platform for change, whether it's CSW or another, is that youth are underestimated. I was a teaching assistant this past year for a course called The Sociology of Youth, and our biggest unit was talking about youth advocacy and activism. And it was very difficult for a lot of our students who were youth themselves to communicate how youth can and do make an impact. It was very, very challenging. The idea that youth don't feel welcomed in political spaces is held widely, and we need more political spaces for youth that aren't just a courtesy, but a place where representatives are the attendees taking notes. So at CSW, I'd like to see more events with youth as the presenters and with politicians and civil society leaders as the participants. There are so many incredible young people who are intelligent, accomplished, passionate, and compassionate, who want to share their voices and views with others. And what they have to offer as presenters and panelists and hosts is valuable. It can make real change, especially when government representatives and experienced advocates are invited not only just to attend, but to really, really listen.
Thank you so much, Mia. I wish I could just snip that section and just send it over to Wage and to team and to CSW to let them know we have change makers who are, identifying issues and are able to bring forward. These are all points that I definitely feel too. I know that there was some sections with youth with us who we spoke about that, just wanting to be able to engage, but also participate and lead. So I really, really appreciate your points there. So as of right now, we're going to move into our Q&A session. We have about 10 to 15 minutes, just under, to talk a little bit about some of the questions you may have had for Dorothy, Messi, Margaret, or Mia. Senator McPhedran had to hop off, but please feel free to populate the chat. I think I may have seen some. And I'm going to take a look at my questions, and I'll have one right here. So we had one, and this one was connected to Mia's comments. And I think maybe Margaret also could point to this as well. But are there any outreach that is happening to high school teachers and students? I'll open the floor to Mia and Margaret. Open popcorn style. Please feel free to.
Margaret, did you want to hop in first, or?
I was gonna ask you, Mia. Sure. Do you want to go, Mia, before me, or?
You know what? I just answered. You go ahead first, and then I'll hop.
I love we're having a conversation. Sure. There's lots of outreach, I think, in terms for us, because we work with the school boards locally in Peterborough. We have pretty good connections with them previously working with the SDGs. So there's lots of workshops around gender equality that we work with teachers, and just in terms of classrooms, we bring a lot of the gender equality workshops and our information to students, etc. We also have something called a program called Teach Outside the Box, where we train teachers who are already teaching about social justice issues, and a lot of it is around the issue of gender equality. So we do sort of do a lot of that work within our community, and yeah.
I would say from my perspective and what I see in my Northern Ontario community, my students don't really know about a lot of these things going on. When I was getting ready to go to CSW, I did a whole lesson about what CSW is and what the United Nations does, because a lot of my students just didn't know. And they also didn't know that there were opportunities and events for youth. I know that there are youth-led organizations in my community that do their absolute best with the resources that they have to do outreach, but a lack of resources and a lack of, volunteers can be a real barrier. I think outreach is something that's really, really important, something that we definitely need to do better at. And I see a huge lack of it here in the North. But I am happy to hear that there are organizations like Margaret's that are having a role in this and are reaching out to youth actively. And I do try to do some of that myself as much as I can with my students.